So this is a short clip from a longer conversation that I had with Leslie Keith. She's the author of a book that was just released September 28th, 2021, called The Lymphatic Code. So hope you enjoy, and if you want to see the whole full conversation that we had about lymphedema and the keto diet and lipedema and many other things, there'll be a link at the end of this video. Enjoy. And you might have answered this question already, but red meat has a really bad reputation, and many people are told to stay as far away from red meat as they can, especially if they have heart problems. So what are your thoughts on that?
So again, there is absolutely no evidence that there is a correlation between red meat and heart problems. A lot of that information comes from studies that are observational studies, and they do what's called a food frequency questionnaire. And they say, over the last year, how much red meat have you eaten? How many pieces of bread have you had? And you're having to recall that information, which is probably not terribly accurate. And one of the largest studies that does this is the NHANES. And they, I can't remember what those initials stand for, but it's NHANES. And it's a huge thousands and thousands and thousands of people over a great number of years that they're tracking people, and they ask them all these kinds of questions. They're asking them to try to remember this stuff. And so as several epidemiologists have looked at those studies and said the answers that the majority of people are giving on those studies is not compatible with life. What they're saying that they consume, they could not be still alive, as far as they're not eating enough, they're not getting all their essential, nutrients, or, so it's not compatible. So those kinds of studies are very, very skewed. And so you have to really look at these types of studies. If you're trying to recall what you ate over the last year, can we really, accept that as hard evidence? Now, if you're doing something where you're logging as you eat it, you're putting stuff down, that would be a much more accurate thing. But then also you need to be able to track, is there anything else in your life that's happening? For instance, some of these studies that said that red meat was bad, it was also if they were smoking. I mean, so I mean, what else is happening in that person's life? So it's nutrition studies are very, very hard to do well. You can do them very well on animals because you can control everything, but humans, you simply can't do that, and we shouldn't do that, right? So it's very, very hard to get good data from human nutrition studies.
And that's kind of been part of the problem, is a lot of the conclusions have been drawn from correlation, meaning two things happen at the same time. Doesn't mean that one thing caused the other thing. Right. And, so
what I like to say is that obese people wear longer belts than lean people. Therefore, do longer belts cause you to be obese? No, they're just associated with each other.
So there are associations and correlations. And so that realization was one too, because it's hard to kind of get over the idea to say about, well, we've been taught this for so long, like how could we just all of a sudden be so, or how could we have been so wrong? But that I think is a big part of the explanation once you look at how that advice was, how we came up with that advice, and that it was mostly from association and correlation, not from really. And like you said, even if you begin with how you gather the data to begin with, and if that is not an accurate way, then the data doesn't really mean anything.
And the other thing that happened with a lot of those studies is that, and this is something that we all have to be careful of, that we have our own biases. We think this is the way something is going to go, and therefore we zero in on something that supports our hypothesis. So I'm very, very conscious of that, and hopefully don't want to do that, because I do believe so strongly that a ketogenic diet is the healthier way to eat. But I don't want to ignore anything that might be contradictory to that. But what happened in a lot of these studies, coming from the 50s on through the 80s, is that they only used the data that agreed with their study, their hypothesis. The ones with Ansel Keys, where he published this data on the 7 country studies. Well, there was actually 22 countries that he looked at, but the data that fit his hypothesis was only in those 6 countries. And so he only published that. And there was several others, other studies that they never even published the data. It was suppressed because it didn't support their hypothesis. So they ran an excellent study, but it didn't come out with the saying that saturated fat or cholesterol was bad for you. And so they suppressed it. And some of these studies are now just, 20 years later, we're getting the information about that.
Wow. That's really fascinating about the 21 countries. And yeah, and that's the human nature bias. And just like you said, we have to be careful. And that if we now believe that the keto diet is the best, I like how you say that. It's now we have to be open-minded. If some study came out that really questioned that whole idea, we have to look at it and see.